Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Odin's movie blog. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we've got some updated box office numbers from the weekend for anyone that watched my video over on the Geeks and Gamers channel. Thank you so much for the support over there. But the numbers for the weekend did not give me the overall totals from the foreign markets. I had mentioned in the video saying we were still waiting for those to update, and it likely for Joker would be around 980 million was the projection. And sure enough, we are looking at numbers $98.6 million. I made this reference on the Welcome to Asgard channel for my review of the movie Doctor Sleep. That is absolutely freaking incredible. Like, seriously, that is tremendous. That means that the movie is roughly $15 million away from crossing the $1 billion mark. Based on the fact that it's making around $1 million a day or so, that seems to be a pretty good indication that it's gonna get that point by next weekend. It's really cool. I mean, obviously, I thought that it had a very good chance of getting it by this coming weekend, this past weekend that just happened. But obviously, we knew that it would be cutting it a little bit close. And sure enough, it's going to miss it by 15 million, but it's definitely going to cross that number by this coming weekend. And what's interesting to me is I was able to watch some of the clips of our boy John Campea, and he said that he thought it was possible that it could reach the $1 billion mark, but that he didn't think it was going to happen because it's slowing down too much. He obviously wasn't paying attention to the foreign market totals because, yes, it was slowing down a tremendous amount here domestically because, hey, it's been out for over a month, so of course it's going to slow down. But every single weekend I've been following this film and I've been seeing it gets in tons of money every single weekend from the foreign markets. I always track the domestic numbers, but whenever we get an official box office update, it always jumped by a large amount of money because of all those markets, because of all the different countries and how well it was doing over there. And so I knew that once those numbers came in, that it was going to be more than $950 million that it had before going into the weekend. And sure enough, it jumped another $35 million. So keep that in mind. It was around $950 million before the weekend. The weekend comes through, it jumps 35 million. Even if we have a 50% drop from this week to next week worldwide, which to me just doesn't really coincide with the drops from the Joker that we've been seeing, which has basically been around, it's pretty much stagnated at around 30% drop every single week, then that means that this film is going to make more than that $1 billion and potentially could even get somewhat close to the $1.1 billion number. Now, that's going to be pushing it just a little bit for it to make another $100 million on top. I know that, and I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen. However, the movie is still making enough per weekend where it's probably going to get to $1.05 billion or so by the end of its run, which is incredible. Obviously, it's not nearly as high as I wish it could be, but this is all, again, without a release in China. If this film had a China release, this film would be at the probably 1.3, $1.4 million $1.4 billion range at that point, because I think it would have done very well in that country, especially with some of the themes in the movie that are really coinciding with what the general sentiment of the people in China is right now with all the nonsense that's going on over there. But Joker, $984.6 million worldwide, incredible, $15 million away from the $1 billion mark. It will hit that number by this weekend. Every single expert is saying it, all except, of course, for John Campea, who I'm hoping and wondering if he's probably changed his tune at this point now that the numbers have come in. But please let me know. Anyone that actually watches his show and actually watches his channel all the time, please let me know if he's changed his tune on that, because there's really no way that this film does not reach the $1 billion mark by this coming weekend. The other film to talk about, which we finally also got a box office update on, is Terminator Dark Fate, which now has a whopping $200 million. Now, the reason why I'm talking about Dark Fate is because we are now 2 weeks into this movie. And as you all know, the first 2 weeks are the most crucial aspect to any movie, because it is really what helps you to understand and predict how much a movie will make. Now, it's a general rule of thumb that most films, most big budget films especially, lower budget films, indie films, they're a little bit harder to track. But big budget films tend to make around 60% of its entire box office run in its first 2 weeks. Now, there have been cases before. I want to say Rogue One was around this number when I did the math a long time ago. I was doing a comparison of how much percentage-wise the Star Wars movies had made in their initial 2 weeks, compare them all to each other. And Last Jedi had made like over 60% of its entire box office in the first 2 weeks, which makes sense because it dropped off a hell of a lot after that point. And then Rogue One, I want to say, was around 50%. So it actually made half of its money in the first 2 weeks, and did so well subsequently after that it continued to do pretty well, have some decent amount of legs to it, where it just didn't have the major drop-offs week in and week out, to the point where it ended up making about twice the amount that, or rather, it basically made 50% of its entire run in the first 2 weeks, and then made the other 50% in the remaining time it was out in theaters. But that's, of course, a very rare case where the film's actually performing well, is actually performing over expectations or around expectations. Dark Fate has absolutely gone in under expectations in every single way. So you've heard this number being thrown around a lot, that the film's going to lose around $100 million or so. Well, now we can get a better understanding as to what this film will probably make. So let's assume the best. Let us assume, best case scenario, this is 50% of what it's going to make. There's no chance in hell it's making another $200 million. There's no way that's going to happen. But let's just assume that it does. Assuming that means that this film craps out at $400 million. Keeping in mind that this film cost, what was the number again? $180 million to make, $185 million to make. You assume that number is probably a range, so it probably is at least $170 million, could be as much as $200 million. Let's assume then that you have to add on about half of that amount. So you're looking at a film that costs, let's see, if we make it $200 million, that means that it costs $300 million. So let's split the difference, $285 million in order to make and promote that film. I would say that that's a pretty fair amount, right? I would say that's a pretty fair amount to say, $285 million. So assuming that it costs that much to make and to market, the film the film only gets back around 60% of its entire box office take. Meaning that if it costs $285 million and it only makes $400 million, that means it's only going to get a little over that $200 million in actual profits. Meaning that the film is still, even then, not going to make its money back. Now, again, I think that's actually being pretty fair to the film. Now, let's assume the more likely scenario, that it's made 60 or even more percent of its entire box office run, which would be, I think, pretty fair to say. I think it might be closer to 65, 70% of its entire run, but let's assume that's the case. Doing the numbers on that, if this $200 million that's already made is 60%, let's be fair here, 60%, that means that this movie will end up crapping out at $330 million. And I would expect that many experts would say that this film most likely will get to around $330 million, and it could be even a little bit less than that or a little bit more than that. $330 million. This film costs $285 million with marketing, around $285 million. And it only keeps 60% or so of that $330 million. Now, I don't have to really break down the numbers for you, but that is the reason why this film is suspected to lose between $100 and $150 million. Like that's absolutely incredible. So just for, because someone had mentioned saying, if you're going to talk about this, why don't you just, actually pull up the calculator, do the math in front of us? And I said, you know what? You're complaining, but, why not? So $285 million, right? So $285 million, let's assume that it makes $330 million. So again, that would be, if assuming that it's already made 60% of its entire box office take, this would be 60%. So $200 million is 60% of $330 million. That's what I'm saying there. For anyone that doesn't like math, that's what I'm saying. $200 million is how much it's made so far. If the total it makes is $330 million, that means that the $200 million is 60%. So that's how I got that number. So let's assume that it only gets around 60% of that number. So what's 60%? 0.6. Oh, I'm already messing it up. See, this is the reason why I don't do the calculator, right? So multiply that by 0.6, which means they would only get of that amount around $198 million. Okay, let's assume that, let's round up, $200 million is how much they would make off of this movie if it indeed reaches the number that most people would suspect that it would. Now, it costs $285 million, or around that amount. So if they only make $200 million in profit, and it costs $285 million in profit, that would be a loss of $85 million. Now, let's assume that it makes even less than that. Let's assume that it doesn't make another $130 million. Let's assume that it makes another $100 million. I think that's absolutely fair. Let's say that it only caps out around $300 million. That seems very likely at this point. Let's go ahead and do the same thing. Multiply that by 0.6. That would put it at $180 million. $285 million cost. Now you're seeing why that $100 million total is being thrown around, because many people are assuming that it only has so much more money left to make at this point. Because on the high end, I think at the high end, people are suspecting $330 million is the max amount of money it can make. On the low end, you're looking closer to the $300 million range that it could make by the end of its run. And if it ends up making that amount of money by the end of its run, you're looking at one of the biggest box office bombs of 2019. Not the biggest movie, not the biggest bomb that I've ever seen. Keep in mind that Solo: A Star Wars Story capped out around $400 million. That film cost around $350 to make before marketing because they had to do all the reshoots or so. And that's the reason why that film lost close to 200, like between 100 at least to $200 million. At least Dark Fate won't be that much of a bomb. However, losing any money at this stage, let alone around $100 million, is not a good look for it. Now, some people might argue saying, well, when they eventually put it out on Netflix, or if they have any services that actually want to pick it up, or any stations that want to pick it up, like HBO or something, because of the contracts, they'll probably make some money back there. It's not going to make that $100 million back in the overall Blu-ray and DVD sales. We pretty much know that at this point, because films don't tend to make that much money back, and even successful ones wouldn't even be able to. Let's just go ahead and try and pull up a comparison. Let's see if we can compare it to another film in a similar franchise, right? So, total spending for John Wick Chapter 3, $16.8 million. Now, this was ending September 15th. Actually, hold on, that's not the right. Why is that the most recent number you have there? What in the world? Weekly Blu-ray charts. That's right, because there is a delay. That's a pretty heavy delay there. Anyway, let me go ahead and try and find a little bit of an older film, because this is the reason why doing things live sometimes is a good thing. Other times, it's not nearly as good. But let's bring up Captain Marvel, everyone's favorite movie, Captain Marvel, because that's the one that has been out for a long time at this point in time. Captain Marvel, which sold over 1 million units at this point. In fact, let me go ahead and see. Let me see the video sales. So total units it sold for Blu-ray, it sold almost 2 million units. That's incredible. I can't believe that it sold that many. But it sold over 2 million units. That's pretty successful. Even with 2 million units, it only made $65 million in the home market theater. Dark Fate's not going to make that kind of money. Because keep in mind, Captain Marvel, as much as we talk crap about it, made $1.1 billion. Made significantly more money in the theaters. Which makes sense as to why there are some people in the world that for some reason, somehow, some way want to buy this movie on Blu-ray. That same amount of people is not going to be there for Dark Fate. So the whole point of that is to show that Dark Fate doesn't have the market. It does not have the numbers. It does not have the people to make that money back. Meaning that this is going to be in no short of terms a loss. A negative loss for the studio. There's no way they're going to make that money back on this film. Meaning this, there's likely not going to be any more Terminator films, at least in the coming years. And even more disturbing in my mind, Paramount Pictures here is really in some dark water. And we all know that when studios end up losing money and end up being not as profitable, that's when you start to talk about selling. Now, there's no reports that Paramount's doing that, or the owners of Paramount are going to be doing that, or anything like that. But it's still something for us to consider. And also, please, I hope that this is a wake-up call to Paramount and to box office everywhere, to studios everywhere, that if you try and take a classic franchise and you try and make it woke, you will go broke. So anyway, let me know thoughts about this. Do you think that Dark Fate is going to reach the $330 million maximum that it really can make at this point, based on the numbers we're receiving? I just don't see it with other films coming out over the coming months, especially in November. You got Frozen 2 coming out in November. I just don't really see anyone left to go see this film, and I don't see the film getting another $100 million. I mean, this film could potentially crap out at $250 million. And if that's the case, that's why some are suspecting it could be as high as a $150 million loss. So that's why this film is indeed a great showcase to show, yeah, you can lose a crap ton of money on a movie if you don't know who to market it to. If you shun your fans, you kill off a major character right away, you crap on T2, you crap on the legacy. If you go ahead and do that, you're going to lose money. And especially if you're going to try and say, oh, we're making Terminator for a new generation. Okay, so what you're telling the old generation then of Terminator fans is, screw you, we don't care about you anymore. We're looking for that new money. But that new money really isn't there in the first place, which is evidenced by this and other films that have tried it in the past. But also, Joker. Do you think Joker is going to hit $1 billion before the weekend? There is a world out there where it could happen, especially with those foreign numbers not coming in as often as we get to the domestic totals. It's going to be extremely interesting to see how those numbers fall. The film's definitely going to cross the $1 billion mark by the end of this weekend. There's a world, though, where it reaches the $1 billion mark beforehand, and that is all in spite people like John Campia. Let me thoughts about this and all the things we talked about in the comment section below. If you like this video, smash that like button, give it a subscribe, house, and a lot. I know this one got a little wonky. I had to pull up a calculator, and I know that people hate seeing math on the screen, so I try to avoid it, but that's for that one person that complained that one time saying, oh, if you're going to do the math in your head, then you might as well just put it on the screen. That way you don't make a mistake. But as you see, I make mistakes all the time because I got ADD. It's just one of the things that I do. Thanks for the love. Thanks for the support. Have a wonderful day, everybody. And as always, God bless.